The dense, uncharted expanse of the Amazon jungle had always been a place of mystery, wonder, and danger. It was in this very wilderness that 20 devout nuns embarked on a mission, one that was intended to uncover what they believed to be divine truths hidden within the heart of the jungle. Their objective was clear: to prove the authenticity of the Bible by finding evidence that would contradict the beliefs of Muslims and reaffirm Christianity's supremacy. Accompanying a group of scientists conducting research in the Amazon, these nuns were not merely travelers but seekers of theological validation. However, fate had other plans. As they ventured deeper into the jungle, navigating its winding rivers aboard a sturdy vessel, an unforeseen disaster struck. The once calm waters beneath them erupted with an unnatural force, as if something massive stirred in the depths below. Without warning, the boat lurched violently, throwing the nuns off balance. Before they could process what was happening, a second, even more powerful jolt sent them tumbling. Screams filled the air as the boat tilted uncontrollably, and within moments it was completely overturned. The dark water swallowed the vessel whole. Gasping for breath, the nuns fought against the relentless current, their habits clinging to their bodies like heavy weights. One by one, they managed to pull themselves onto the muddy riverbanks, drenched and terrified. The jungle around them was deafeningly silent, save for the distant howls of unseen creatures. They had survived, but at what cost? As they gathered, their bearings, realization struck. The scientists were gone. Whatever force had capsized their boat had claimed their lives, leaving only the 20 nuns stranded in the middle of one of the world's most dangerous rainforests. In their desperation, they turned to their faith, whispering hurried prayers. It was then that something miraculous happened. Something that would later leave even the most skeptical among them questioning the very fabric of their beliefs. A distant plume of smoke rose in the sky, a sign of human presence in an otherwise desolate jungle. With no other option, they set out toward the unknown, unaware that their journey was about to lead them to something far greater than they had ever imagined. The jungle stretched endlessly in front of them. With each step, the nuns' hope grew, though so did their exhaustion. They had no provisions, no water, and no knowledge of how far they would have to go. Yet the sight of that plume of smoke was their lifeline, and they clung to the possibility that they might find someone, anyone who could help them. The weight of their grief over the loss of their companions pressed heavily on their hearts, but the need to survive and find salvation kept them moving forward. The path was treacherous. Overgrown vines snagged at their habits, thorny bushes tore at their skin, and the oppressive humidity made it difficult to breathe. But they pushed on, urging one another with quiet prayers and reassurances. The dense trees above shielded them from the harsh sun, but it only made the air feel thicker, heavier, as though the jungle itself was conspiring against them. Still, they continued, driven by the hope of finding the source of the smoke, of finding salvation. As they trudged deeper into the wilderness, every sound seemed amplified. The crunch of leaves underfoot, the distant call of strange creatures, and the rustling of unseen beings in the shadows. The nuns were no longer just religious women on a mission. They had become survivors in a hostile environment. The only thing that sustained them now was their faith. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, they stumbled upon a clearing. The smoke was no longer distant. It was close, just beyond a thick thicket of trees. The nuns, exhausted and desperate, found new strength in the sight of their possible salvation. But as they approached, they realized that what they had hoped for was not what they would find. The smoke led them to a village of people who did not speak their language, did not share their beliefs, and whose presence would turn their mission upside down. The purpose of the 20 nuns' mission was not just an ordinary expedition into the wild Amazon jungle. They had traveled with a clear objective, one that was both theological and scientific. Alongside a group of Christian scientists, they were heading into the heart of the jungle for a purpose that was both intriguing and controversial. The scientists had come with a very specific goal: to conduct a groundbreaking experiment that would revolutionize medicine. By studying the unique insects and plant life found in the depths of the Amazon, they aimed to create a new kind of medicine, one that could potentially save countless lives. Their research was focused on extracting compounds from these exotic species to formulate a groundbreaking cure. But the nuns had a different, more spiritually inclined agenda. They were not only there to assist in the scientific study, but were, on a separate mission, one of religious importance. The nuns believed that the Bible contained hidden signs, particularly related to the Amazon rainforest. There were ancient references in the Bible that they believed could be uncovered in the wilderness, signs that would prove Christianity's truth and disprove the teachings of Islam. Their mission was clear: to find proof, evidence that could affirm Christianity's authenticity in the face of growing skepticism from other faiths, especially Islam. It is well known among Christians that the Bible has undergone numerous revisions over the centuries. The nuns, however, were committed to proving that despite the changes, the core messages of the Bible were still true, and they saw the Amazon jungle as the final frontier in proving this. There were whispers within their circle about certain prophecies in the Bible, prophecies that they believed were connected to the hidden parts of the Amazon. These beliefs drove them forward into the unknown, with the hope of discovering something monumental that would change the course of history. The Amazon jungle was no ordinary place. With its dense foliage, dangerous animals, and the ever-present threat of unknown tribes, it was the perfect setting for a spiritual journey of this magnitude. The nuns believed that by witnessing something miraculous, they would not only affirm their faith, but also send a message to the world that would reignite belief in Christianity's divine power. They had no idea, however, what dangers lay ahead. As the scientists set up their equipment and began gathering samples, the nuns explored the jungle, hoping to find the evidence they had been sent for. While the scientists focused on their research, the nuns ventured deeper into the wilderness, studying their surroundings and searching for clues. At first, everything seemed normal: dense trees, winding rivers, and a jungle that felt alive with energy. But as they ventured further, strange occurrences began to unfold. They discovered bizarre markings on trees, heard sounds they couldn't explain, and began experiencing unsettling feelings, as if they were being watched. Despite these mysterious occurrences, the nuns pressed on, determined to fulfill their mission. They believed that the Amazon held the key to proving the Bible's legitimacy. But as the days passed, their optimism began to wane. The jungle, with its looming dangers and unsettling atmosphere, began to feel less like a place of divine discovery and more like a dark and dangerous labyrinth. It was during one of their deep explorations that they stumbled upon something they couldn't explain: a mysterious altar hidden deep within the jungle. The altar, made of stone, was covered in intricate carvings, some of which resembled ancient Christian symbols. But there were others, symbols they couldn't identify. It was clear that this was no ordinary discovery. The altar seemed to emanate an otherworldly energy, a power that left the nuns both in awe and fear. They gathered around the altar, unsure of what they had found. Was it a sign from God? Was it proof that their mission was divinely ordained? Or was it a warning? The air grew thick with tension as they began to pray, seeking answers. But as they did, something strange happened, something that would change their lives forever. At that very moment, the ground beneath them trembled. The sky grew darker, and an eerie silence enveloped the jungle. The nuns, shaken but steadfast in their faith, continued to pray. But they felt an overwhelming presence, as if the jungle itself had come alive and was watching them. It was as if the jungle had awakened, responding to their prayers and questioning their purpose. Little did they know, this was just the beginning of a journey that would test their faith in ways they couldn't have imagined. The jungle had more to reveal, and the truth about their mission was far beyond what any of them had anticipated. Their faith would be challenged, their beliefs would be shaken, and they would come face to face with something far greater than their mission in the Amazon. The nuns' purpose had changed, but they didn't know it yet. As they left the altar, they couldn't shake the feeling that they were being followed. The presence in the jungle was not something they could understand, but they knew it was real. The jungle had become more than just a place of research. It had become a living, breathing entity that seemed to have its own agenda. Days passed without any word from the group of scientists and the 20 nuns. Back home, there had been growing concerns about the lack of communication from the team. When the news broke, it sent shockwaves through the world. The boat that had been carrying the scientists and the nuns toward the heart of the Amazon jungle had capsized under mysterious circumstances. Reports surfaced that the ship, which had been navigating the turbulent rivers of the Amazon, had suddenly, and without warning, suffered a catastrophic failure. The first signs of distress were radio signals, distorted and broken, faintly coming from the ship's distress beacon. These signals continued intermittently for hours before they completely stopped. The authorities were initially unsure of what had happened, but the message was clear. The vessel had gone down. At first, the situation seemed under control. Authorities believed the team might have experienced technical difficulties, and the signals were simply being delayed due to technical issues. But as the hours turned to days, it became clear that something far more sinister had occurred. The signal stopped completely, and after several attempts to re-establish contact, the search for the missing group turned from a routine rescue mission to something much more urgent. As the news of their disappearance spread, a sense of dread settled over the families of the missing and the public. Were the nuns and scientists still alive, or had they met with a tragic end? The longer the team was absent, the more impossible it seemed that anyone could have survived. Yet, despite the overwhelming uncertainty, a rescue mission was immediately launched. A rescue team, composed of experts in jungle survival, medical personnel, and experienced helicopter pilots, was assembled with one goal: to reach the group of missing people, wherever they may be, and bring them back to safety. The team was given the mission to locate the wreckage of the boat, retrieve any survivors, and determine what had happened. They knew the dangers of the jungle. The harsh conditions, hostile wildlife, and the remoteness of the area made the search particularly difficult, but their determination was unwavering. As the helicopters took off, soaring over the dense jungle canopy, the team felt the weight of the responsibility they were carrying. They knew the Amazon was a place where many had vanished without a trace. The trees stretched endlessly in every direction, and it was easy to get lost even with advanced technology. The helicopters were equipped with the best tools available, including infrared sensors to detect heat signatures and communications equipment designed to track the faintest signals. Hours turned into a full day as the helicopters scoured the thick foliage below, trying to find any sign of the wrecked boat or the missing team. But it was a needle in a haystack effort. The landscape below seemed impenetrable, a sea of green that hid all evidence of the disaster. Every minute felt like an eternity. The team worked tirelessly, desperate to find the survivors before it was too late. Just as hope was beginning to fade, the rescue team spotted something unusual: a plume of smoke rising from the jungle below. It was faint, but it was a clear indication that someone might be alive. The team quickly maneuvered the helicopters toward the smoke, hoping it was a sign that the nuns or the scientists had managed to survive. As the helicopters hovered over the jungle, the sight below confirmed what they had hoped for. There in a clearing were signs of human activity. They could see movement below, figures emerging from the thick underbrush. The smoke had been a signal, a way for the survivors to alert anyone who might be looking for them. The nuns, though, exhausted and broken, were still alive. Descending slowly, the helicopters landed in the clearing, and the rescue team rushed out, ready to assist the survivors. The nuns, shocked and terrified, were hesitant at first, but soon realized that they were finally safe. It was then that they began to explain what had happened. Through tear-filled eyes, the nuns spoke of the disaster they had witnessed. They described the ship's sudden collision with an unknown force, the terrifying moments when the boat had capsized, and their desperate flight into the jungle. They told of the strange, unexplainable events they had witnessed in the jungle, of the eerie silence, the feeling of being watched, and the incredible discoveries they had made in the wilderness. But despite the terrifying ordeal, the nuns were grateful to be alive. The rescue team, overwhelmed with relief, assisted them into the helicopters and began their journey back to safety. As they flew away from the jungle, the nuns looked back, their hearts heavy with the memories of what they had encountered. Their mission had started as an effort to uncover the hidden truths of their faith, but what they had discovered in the Amazon was far greater, far more powerful than they had ever imagined. The rescue mission had succeeded, but the journey for the nuns was far from over. They had survived the jungle, but what they had learned in the depths of the Amazon would change their lives forever. The question remained: what had really happened in the jungle, and how would their faith be tested now? The rescue operation was in full swing, but the journey of the nuns and scientists was far from over. The story of what had happened on that fateful expedition was only beginning to unfold. The events leading up to the disaster were still fresh in the minds of the survivors, and as they shared their experiences, the details of the terrifying moments before the boat's sinking began to emerge. The vessel carrying the 20 nuns and 5 scientists had been navigating the winding rivers of the Amazon. The journey had been challenging, with unpredictable currents and dense vegetation on either side. The group had been in high spirits, focused on their mission, and unaware of the dark force that would soon disrupt their lives. As they traveled deeper into the jungle, the crew began to notice an eerie stillness around them. The sounds of the jungle seemed to fade away, and the water grew unnaturally calm. The ship's crew dismissed it at first, attributing the silence to the isolation of the area. But as the boat glided over the water, a sudden violent tremor shook the vessel. The nuns and scientists were thrown from their seats, gripping the sides of the boat to steady themselves. A loud crash echoed from beneath the boat, sending waves of panic through the group. The first officer aboard the boat immediately ordered the crew to check below deck, suspecting a mechanical failure. But what they found was far more terrifying than any mechanical issue. Something beneath the water's surface had made contact with the hull, a massive, unseen force that seemed almost alive. The crew members exchanged nervous glances, unsure of what to make of the situation. Before they could react further, the boat was struck again, this time with even greater force. The hull cracked, and a loud splintering sound reverberated through the air. The ship's timbers groaned under the immense pressure, and panic began to spread throughout the group. The nuns were praying, clutching their rosaries as they whispered urgent prayers under their breath. The scientists attempted to maintain order, trying to assess the damage and prevent the boat from sinking. But as the boat rocked violently from side to side, it became clear that their efforts were futile. The vessel was going down. As the boat began to tilt, one of the scientists shouted that something had struck the vessel from below. But what could it have been? No one had seen anything. The water, despite its initial calm, now seemed to be teeming with an unseen force. The boat was being torn apart piece by piece, and there was no way to avoid it. Panic erupted as the boat began to sink rapidly. The crew and passengers scrambled for life vests, throwing themselves into the water in a desperate attempt to survive. The current was strong, and the nuns struggled to stay afloat, their habits weighing them down as the boat vanished beneath the surface. The survivors were left alone in the dark, murky waters of the Amazon River. But the terror didn't end there. In the chaos of the sinking boat, something even more chilling occurred. The survivors began to hear splashing in the water, a sound like something large and heavy moving through the river. The nuns turned, their hearts pounding in their chests, and saw something rising from the depths. The creature was enormous, its size defying belief. It was not like anything they had ever seen before, certainly not a crocodile or a snake. It was a creature of the water, with a massive body that seemed to ripple and undulate as it approached. Its eyes gleamed, cold and predatory, as it glided toward them through the murky waters. In that moment, the nuns realized they were not alone. The jungle had more than just plants and animals. It harbored creatures that no one could have imagined. The water beneath them was not as calm as it had seemed. The creature lunged toward the boat's wreckage, and the survivors screamed in terror as they watched it engulf several of the scientists. The water churned violently as the creature disappeared beneath the surface, dragging its prey with it. The remaining survivors, now completely overcome with fear, began to swim frantically toward the riverbank, not daring to look back. The nuns, in a desperate bid for survival, raced toward the shore, praying for their lives. The massive creature was still lurking beneath the water, and they could feel its presence as it circled beneath them. The nuns were nearly exhausted, their muscles aching from the effort to stay afloat. They had no idea what they were swimming toward, only the hope that they might find shelter on the distant shore. As the last of the survivors scrambled onto land, they were met with silence. The creature had vanished, leaving only the wreckage of the boat behind. The jungle around them seemed still, as though holding its breath. The survivors huddled together on the riverbank, shaken and terrified, trying to make sense of what had just happened. The attack by the unknown creature was only the beginning of their nightmare. The Amazon had shown them its power, and the survivors knew they had narrowly escaped a fate worse than death. But there was no time to dwell on the horror they had just witnessed. They were stranded in one of the most dangerous places on Earth, and their only option was to move forward into the unknown, where more dangers awaited. The Amazon jungle had become their new reality. 5 scientists and 20 nuns, all of them survivors of the shipwreck, now faced the unrelenting wilderness. Each step taken in search of safety and a glimmer of hope. The jungle was unforgiving. The thick foliage and humid air were a constant battle, and the fear of the unknown crept into their minds, but there was no turning back. The wreckage of their boat had disappeared beneath the murky water, leaving them stranded in the heart of one of the world's most dangerous ecosystems. The survivors had no idea where to go. Their first instinct was to find shelter, but with no map and no direction, they simply started walking, hoping for any sign of life, anything that could lead them to civilization, or at least a place where they could rest and regroup. Every step was filled with uncertainty, and as the day stretched into night, the weight of their situation began to settle in. They were alone, completely alone. Their immediate priority was survival. The nuns, despite their spiritual devotion, could not ignore the hunger and thirst that gnawed at them. They had no food, no water, and no supplies. The jungle, despite its abundant life, was a cruel host, offering no easy means of sustenance. The nuns, who had been so accustomed to a life of order and discipline, now found themselves at the mercy of the jungle. They were forced to push aside their fear and embrace their instincts. Their prayers continued, but even the most devout among them knew they had to take practical steps to survive. They used whatever tools they had left, attempting to gather water from streams and rivers and collecting any edible plants they could find. The scientists, who were more familiar with the ways of the jungle, tried to offer advice, but their knowledge seemed insufficient in the face of the jungle's overwhelming vastness. As they walked, the nuns began to notice something strange. In the distance, they could see faint plumes of smoke rising into the sky, an unmistakable sign of human habitation. Despite their fatigue, this sight ignited a spark of hope in their hearts, but it also raised questions. Were these people friend or foe? Was this a trap? There was no way of knowing, but their exhaustion overpowered their fear. They had no choice but to follow the smoke. The jungle was a relentless adversary, and each step brought new challenges. The underbrush was thick and tangled, slowing their progress. Strange sounds echoed through the trees, unfamiliar cries from unseen creatures that sent shivers down their spines. But they pressed on, their belief in something beyond the jungle's grasp keeping them moving forward. They were driven by one thought, the possibility that salvation was just within reach. As they neared the source of the smoke, they saw figures moving in the distance. At first, the nuns hesitated, unsure of what they had found, but as they drew closer, they realized these were people, locals who lived in the jungle, seemingly untouched by the outside world. The survivors were cautious, approaching with both fear and relief. The villagers were wary of the newcomers at first. They were a quiet, reserved people, living off the land in isolation from the outside world. But after some time, they seemed to recognize the desperation in the nuns and scientists, offering them food and water. The nuns, though exhausted, felt a deep sense of gratitude. They had survived the jungle's dangers and had found a form of refuge, even if it was temporary. Yet despite their relief, there was an underlying tension. The villagers, though kind, were not like the nuns. They lived by their own customs, their own beliefs, and their presence in the jungle was a stark reminder of the world outside. The nuns, who had come seeking proof of their faith, were now faced with a different reality. The people they encountered were not the Christians they had expected, but Muslims, believers who lived a life of devotion far different from their own. The nuns could not ignore the irony of the situation. They had traveled all this way seeking evidence to prove the Bible's truth, only to find a community whose faith and practices were entirely different from their own. The nuns' internal conflict was palpable. They had no choice but to accept the hospitality of the villagers. Their situation was desperate, and they had no other option but to stay. In the days that followed, the nuns and scientists learned more about the villagers' way of life. Despite the differences in faith, they were kind and generous, offering their help without question. The nuns began to realize that their preconceived notions about Islam were wrong. They saw the faith of the villagers, their devotion, and their kindness. The experience began to challenge everything they had once believed. For the first time, the nuns started to question their mission. They had come to the jungle seeking proof of the Bible's supremacy, but what they found was a community that lived its faith with just as much conviction. They couldn't help but wonder, had they been wrong all along? After days of walking, the 20 nuns and their companions had finally found some semblance of refuge. The village, although unlike anything they had ever encountered, offered shelter, food, and a place to rest. But the overwhelming sense of relief was tempered by unease, as the nuns couldn't shake the conflict brewing inside their hearts. The villagers were kind-hearted and generous, but they were Muslims. For the nuns, this was not just a cultural difference, it was a spiritual divide. They had spent their entire lives believing in the superiority of Christianity, convinced that it was the one true faith. Yet here, in the heart of the jungle, they found themselves surrounded by people whose faith was just as strong, just as deeply rooted. This posed a dilemma that none of them had anticipated. How could they reconcile what they had been taught with the reality of the world around them? How could they continue to believe in their mission after experiencing firsthand the devotion and faith of others? The first night in the village was quiet. The nuns huddled together in one of the huts, sharing their thoughts in hushed tones. The air was thick with questions, with doubts, and with a deep sense of discomfort. The jungle, which had once seemed like an insurmountable obstacle, now felt more like a catalyst, a place where their faith was being put to the test in ways they could never have imagined. One of the younger nuns, Sister Maria, broke the silence. Her voice was soft, but there was an urgency in it. "I don't understand," she said, her hands trembling slightly. "These people, they are good. They are kind. They have a deep faith, just like we do. But they believe in something different. How can that be?" Another nun, Sister Catherine, nodded solemnly. "I have been asking myself the same thing. We were taught that Christianity is the only path to salvation. But these people, they pray, they give charity, they fast, they live their faith. How can we continue to believe that we are the only ones who hold the truth?" Sister Maria looked down at her hands, deep in thought. "Maybe we were wrong. Maybe we were never meant to come here to prove the Bible's supremacy. Perhaps we were meant to learn something else, something greater." The debate raged on, with each nun expressing her doubts and struggles. Some were firm in their beliefs, unwilling to consider that they might have been wrong all along. Others, like Sister Maria, were beginning to question the very foundation of their mission. It was not just a theological struggle, it was a personal one too. These women had devoted their lives to a cause they believed in, only to be confronted with the reality that the world was not as they had imagined it. As the evening wore on, the conversation grew more intense. Sister Catherine, who had always been a pillar of strength, spoke quietly but firmly. "We cannot abandon what we have always known. We cannot allow these people to confuse us. Christianity has always been the true path, and we must remain steadfast in our faith." But Sister Maria shook her head. "But what if the truth isn't as simple as we've been taught? What if there's something more we need to understand? These people, they may be different in their beliefs, but their faith is no less sincere than ours. We can't just ignore that." The conversation took a turn as another nun, Sister Elizabeth, spoke up. She had been quiet until now, but the words she said carried a weight that silenced the others. What if our mission was never about proving the Bible's truth? What if it was about learning from others, understanding them, and seeing beyond our own narrow perspectives? Sister Maria's eyes widened. "You think that's what we're here for? To learn from them?" Sister Elizabeth nodded. "I believe that our journey, our faith, has brought us here for a reason. We thought we were here to convince these people that Christianity was the only true faith. But maybe we were meant to see that all faiths have their own truth. Maybe we are supposed to learn from their devotion, from the way they live their faith so sincerely. The silence that followed was thick with realization. The nuns had come to the jungle with one mission: to prove that their faith was the only true path. But now they were beginning to see that the path to truth was not as simple as they had believed. As the night deepened, the nuns reflected on their words. The village, which had initially seemed like a foreign and uncomfortable place, now felt different. The villagers, despite their differences in belief, had welcomed them without hesitation, showing kindness and warmth. They had offered them food, shelter, and compassion, and in return, the nuns had been given something far more valuable: the opportunity to question their own beliefs. The conversations continued long into the night, with each nun grappling with her own understanding of faith and truth. They had come to the Amazon to find evidence to prove the Bible's supremacy, but what they had discovered was far more profound: a deeper understanding of humanity, faith, and the shared devotion that transcended religious boundaries. The jungle had not only tested their physical endurance, but had also challenged their beliefs in ways they had never imagined. They had come seeking proof of the Bible's truth, but they had found something far greater: the realization that faith in all its forms could lead to the same truth. And so, as the dawn of a new day broke over the jungle, the nuns found themselves standing at a crossroads, not just in their journey through the Amazon, but in their spiritual lives. Their mission had taken an unexpected turn, but they could not deny the lessons they had learned. The path forward was uncertain, but it was one they had to walk together, faithful yet open to the truth in all its forms. The next few days in the village were filled with a sense of uneasy calm. The nuns had begun to adjust to the rhythms of life in the jungle, learning to accept their surroundings and the kindness of the villagers. However, deep down, they knew their time in the jungle was still fraught with danger. The very fact that they were in such an isolated location meant that anything could happen at any moment. The jungle was not a place to be taken lightly. One evening, as the sun began to set, the village was suddenly thrown into chaos. A scream echoed from the edge of the village, followed by the sound of rushing footsteps. The villagers began to shout in alarm, their voices filled with fear. The nuns, though unsettled, quickly gathered together, unsure of what was happening. It didn't take long for the source of the panic to reveal itself. Emerging from the trees at the edge of the village were giant spiders, massive creatures, with long spindly legs, their bodies the size of large rocks. These were not ordinary insects. They were terrifying, bloodthirsty creatures that preyed on anything they could find. The villagers scrambled in panic, their faces filled with dread as the spiders moved closer. The nuns were paralyzed with fear. They had never seen anything like this before. These creatures were unlike any insect they had encountered. The giant spiders began to descend upon the villagers, their large fangs gleaming in the dim light. Some of the villagers tried to fight back, but it was clear that they were outmatched. The spiders were too powerful, too fast. As the nuns watched in horror, they felt a deep sense of helplessness. They had been trained to face many challenges, but nothing had prepared them for this. Their minds raced as they tried to think of a way to help, but the reality of the situation set in quickly. There was nothing they could do. The spiders were relentless, and there was no escape for the villagers. Just as the situation seemed hopeless, something unexpected happened. From the darkness of the jungle, a group of men carrying torches emerged. They were armed with long spears, and they immediately began to charge at the spiders, driving them back with fire and weapons. The spiders, though powerful, seemed to fear the flames. With their retreat, the villagers breathed a collective sigh of relief. The nuns, still shaken, watched as the men fought off the spiders. The battle was fierce, but the villagers' bravery combined with the fire eventually forced the creatures to retreat back into the jungle. The village was safe for now, but the nuns were left shaken, their hearts racing from the terror they had just witnessed. The jungle was alive with dangers, many of which they could not even begin to comprehend. The villagers, though resilient, had shown no fear in the face of such terror. The nuns, on the other hand, had never encountered a threat like this, and the experience left them questioning everything they had known about the world they lived in. As the night settled in, the nuns and villagers gathered around a large fire to offer their thanks for surviving the ordeal. The villagers spoke of the creatures they had encountered in the jungle, some of which were even more dangerous than the spiders. They explained that the jungle had its own rules, its own inhabitants, and that not all of them were friendly. The nuns listened in stunned silence, realizing how little they knew about the world they were in. They had come to the jungle thinking they would find something that would prove their faith, something that would validate their beliefs. But what they had encountered instead was a reality far more complex than they had ever imagined. The creatures of the jungle were only one example of the mysteries the world held, mysteries that no one could fully understand. The villagers, words stayed with them throughout the night as the fire crackled and the jungle hummed with life. The nuns had come seeking truth, but what they had found was not the truth they expected. They had come to the Amazon with a mission to prove their beliefs, to confirm their faith in the Bible, but in the process, they had been confronted with a reality that was more diverse, more dangerous, and more profound than they could have ever anticipated. The next morning, the nuns gathered together, still shaken by the events of the previous night. They had learned a valuable lesson. Faith alone was not enough to survive in a world full of unknowns. In the jungle, survival required more than just belief. It required adaptability, strength, and understanding. The jungle was indifferent to their mission. It was not interested in proving the supremacy of any one faith. Instead, it was a place where all beliefs were tested, where survival was the only law that mattered. As the nuns prepared to leave the village and continue their journey, they knew they had much to learn, not just about the jungle, but about themselves. The Amazon had shown them the fragility of their beliefs and the strength of the human spirit in the face of adversity. It was a lesson they would carry with them for the rest of their lives. The attack by the giant spiders had left the nuns and the villagers shaken, but it also brought them closer together. The fire had driven the creatures away, but the fear and tension lingered in the air. The nuns had experienced their first true taste of the dangers that lurked within the depths of the Amazon. For the villagers, however, it was just another day in their remote, isolated existence. They had seen many things in the jungle, but this attack, this invasion of their sanctuary, was a reminder that even the smallest disruption could turn into a life-or-death struggle. Despite the terrifying ordeal, the villagers remained calm, tending to the injured and offering what comfort they could. The nuns, although still reeling from the encounter, were deeply moved by the villagers' courage and resilience. They had come to the jungle with the hope of proving the Bible's truth, but what they had witnessed was something entirely different. The strength of a community united by their shared faith, the power of survival, and the quiet strength that comes from living in harmony with nature. As the sun began to set, the nuns and the villagers gathered around a large fire, the flickering flames casting long shadows over their faces. It was here, in this moment of shared adversity, that the nuns learned more about the faith of the villagers and the lives they led. What they had once seen as an obstacle to their own beliefs now seemed like something worth exploring. One of the villagers, an elderly man named Ahmed, sat near the fire and began to speak. His voice was low and steady, carrying the weight of experience. "We live by a simple truth here," he said, his eyes reflecting the warmth of the flames. "Faith is not about what you believe, but how you live your belief. We do not need to prove our faith to others. It is enough that we live it, that we embody the teachings of our prophet and the values we hold dear. In the jungle, we have learned to respect all life, to cherish the simple things, and to never take anything for granted. Survival here is not just about food and shelter. It is about faith, community, and understanding." The nuns listened in stunned silence, absorbing his words. The simplicity and depth of his message were unlike anything they had ever heard. For so long, they had believed that their mission in the Amazon was to prove the supremacy of their own faith, to show the world that Christianity was the only true path. But here, in the heart of the jungle, they were being confronted with a reality they had never considered. The possibility that faith was not about proving the truth of one belief over another, but about living that belief with sincerity and Devotion. As the night wore on, the nuns began to reflect on their own lives and their own faith. They had come to the Amazon with a mission to prove the truth of Christianity, but in the face of the villagers' unwavering faith, they realized that their mission had been flawed from the beginning. It was not about proving anything to anyone. It was about living the truth of their faith, about embodying the teachings of Christ in their actions, their words, and their lives. The conversation around the fire continued, and the nuns began to ask the villagers more about their faith. They wanted to understand how the villagers had come to live so deeply in accordance with their beliefs, how they had managed to build a community based on shared values in such an isolated and dangerous part of the world. The villagers spoke of their daily routines, prayers, fasting, and the deep respect they held for one another. They explained the importance of charity, of giving to those in need, and of caring for the environment. They spoke of the teachings of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and the way they tried to live their lives in accordance with the principles of Islam. The more the nuns listened, the more they realized how much they had in common with these people. While their faiths were different, the underlying values they shared, compassion, respect for life, and a desire to live in harmony with the world around them, were the same. The villagers had found peace in their faith, and the nuns realized that they too could find peace by embracing the same values, regardless of the religion they followed. As the conversation continued, Sister Maria found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought her here. She had come to the Amazon to prove the truth of her faith, to find evidence that would support her beliefs. But in the face of the villagers' quiet strength and unwavering devotion, she began to understand that faith was not about proving anything. It was about living it. She had been so focused on finding answers to her questions that she had failed to see the truth that was already before her. Faith was not something to be argued or debated. It was something to be lived. The next morning, as the nuns prepared to leave the village and continue their journey, they felt a deep sense of gratitude. They had come to the Amazon searching for answers, but what they had found was something far greater than they had ever imagined. The villagers had shown them a new way of seeing the world, a way that was not rooted in religious superiority or division, but in shared humanity and the power of faith. The nuns realized that their mission had never been about proving the truth of one religion over another. It had been about understanding the value of faith, compassion, and community. As they bid farewell to the villagers, the nuns carried with them a new understanding of what it meant to live a life of faith. They had come to the jungle to prove something, but in the process they had learned that faith was not about proof. It was about living with sincerity, respect, and love. The villagers had welcomed the nuns into their midst with open arms, offering them food, shelter, and protection from the dangers of the jungle. For the nuns, this was both a relief and a source of discomfort. Their mission in the Amazon had been to uncover proof of the Bible's truth, to demonstrate that Christianity was the only true faith. But here, in this isolated corner of the world, they found themselves in the company of people whose beliefs differed from their own. And yet these people lived with a deep devotion, a devotion that was evident in their every action. As days passed, the nuns began to learn more about the villagers' way of life. They observed the simplicity with which the villagers lived, their reverence for nature, and their strong sense of community. It was clear that the villagers, despite their differences, were driven by the same principles that had guided the nuns throughout their lives: compassion, love for humanity, and a deep connection to their faith. Despite their growing admiration for the villagers, the nuns struggled to reconcile what they were witnessing with their previous beliefs. They had been taught that Islam, like all other religions, was false, that only Christianity held the key to salvation. But as they spent more time with the villagers, they began to feel a growing sense of unease. The teachings of Islam, as they learned from the villagers, were not what they had been led to believe. Islam was not a religion of violence and hatred, but one of peace, charity, and submission to the will of God. One evening, as the nuns sat around a fire with the villagers, the conversation turned to religion. The villagers spoke of their faith with a quiet, unwavering conviction. They spoke of the Quran, of the life of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and the core principles of Islam, principles that resonated deeply with the nuns despite the theological divide. The nuns had come to the Amazon with one mission: to prove that Christianity was the only true faith. But in the presence of these villagers, they began to see a different truth, one that was far more complex than they had ever imagined. Sister Maria, who had been the most vocal in her doubts about their mission, spoke up that night. "I do not understand," she said, her voice trembling. "How can it be that your faith, your devotion is so strong and pure, and yet we have been taught to believe that Islam is false? How can we reconcile these two truths?" The villagers listened attentively, and Ahmed, the elderly man who had been a source of wisdom for the nuns, spoke gently. "Our faith teaches us to live by the values of kindness, generosity, and compassion," he said. "We do not seek to impose our beliefs on others, but to live with respect for all people. Islam is not about division. It is about unity, submission to the will of Allah, and living a righteous life. We are all part of the same humanity, and our faith is a guide for how we treat each other." Sister Maria's mind was racing. She had never considered Islam in this way before. The teachings she had received about the religion had been narrow and distorted, focused on the differences rather than the similarities. Now, in the face of the villagers' kindness and faith, she found herself questioning everything she had believed. Was it possible that Islam held truths that she had been blind to? Was it possible that there was more than one path to salvation? The nuns, though still uncertain, began to engage in deep conversations with the villagers. They asked questions, seeking to understand the Quran and the teachings of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. They learned, as the villagers explained, the 5 pillars of Islam, the importance of charity, and the emphasis on community and social justice. The more they learned, the more they realized that many of the values they had cherished in their own faith were shared by Islam. As the days passed, the nuns' internal struggles intensified. They had come to the Amazon with a single mission, but now they found themselves confronted with a new reality. The beliefs they had once held as absolute truths were now being called into question. How could they continue to uphold their own faith when they saw the same devotion, the same commitment to goodness, in the hearts of those who followed Islam? It was during one of their nightly discussions that Sister Maria felt a shift in her heart. She had been questioning her faith for days, but now, for the first time, she felt the presence of something greater than herself. It was not the need to prove one religion over another, but a desire to seek truth, to embrace the truth wherever it could be found. The next morning, as the villagers gathered for their morning prayer, Sister Maria joined them. It was not a decision made lightly, but one born of her search for truth, her desire to understand the world, and her faith in a deeper way. She did not know what the future held, but she knew that she could no longer remain stagnant in her understanding. She felt a deep sense of peace as she joined the villagers in prayer, her heart open to the possibility that the truth she had sought for so long might come in a form she had never expected. 7 days had passed since the terrifying attack by the giant spiders, and the survivors, 20 nuns and 5 scientists, had settled into a strange but necessary routine with the villagers. Their bodies were weary, their minds still troubled, but there was a sense of stability that had begun to take root. The villagers had shown them kindness, and in return, the nuns had opened their hearts and minds, learning about the life and faith of the people who had come to their rescue in the jungle. It was during this time of reflection and inner turmoil that the rescue team finally arrived. The distant hum of helicopters echoed through the dense jungle, and soon, the familiar sound of rotor blades slicing through the air signaled their approach. The survivors, now accustomed to the isolation of the jungle, barely registered the noise at first, but when they saw the helicopters descending through the canopy, a mixture of relief and apprehension washed over them. The nuns, though relieved to see help finally arriving, were not entirely certain how they would be received. Their appearance had changed. The long days in the jungle had left them disheveled, their clothes torn and soiled, and their once stern expressions softened by the trauma of their ordeal. But what had changed most was not their outward appearance. It was their faith. They had come to the Amazon with the singular goal of proving the Bible's supremacy, but in the company of the villagers, they had come to understand something deeper. That faith was not about proving who was right or wrong, but about living with love and respect for all humanity. The helicopters landed with a thud, and the rescue team immediately began to unload supplies and medical equipment. The nuns and the scientists were led toward the helicopters, but the nuns hesitated, unsure of how to approach the situation. They had been on this journey for so long, and now they faced the decision of whether or not to return to the world they had left behind, to re-enter the life they had known before, or to stay in the jungle, where their beliefs had been fundamentally changed. As they boarded the helicopter, one of the rescue team members, a man named Captain Harris, noticed something different. The nuns, despite their exhaustion, had a calmness about them that he hadn't seen before. Their faces were serene, their eyes no longer filled with the certainty of a single belief, but with a new understanding, a deep spiritual peace that transcended their earlier mission. Captain Harris couldn't help but notice the change in them. He approached Sister Maria, who had once been the most vocal about their mission to prove Christianity's truth. "Sister, we're so glad to have found you. We've been searching for days," Captain Harris said, his voice filled with relief. "Sister," Maria smiled faintly, but her eyes held a complexity that he couldn't quite place. "Thank you for coming," she replied, her voice steady. "We've learned a lot here. The jungle has shown us things we never expected." Captain Harris raised an eyebrow, sensing that something had shifted within the group. "Are you okay? Are all of you all right?" "We're physically fine," Sister Maria answered, her tone calm. "But the truth is, we've been changed. What we came here to prove has become something completely different. We no longer see things the way we did before." Captain Harris didn't press further, but instead nodded with understanding. He had seen the physical and emotional toll the jungle had taken on people, but he also sensed that there was more to this group than mere survival. These women had undergone a transformation, one that was not just about the loss of their original mission, but about their discovery of something greater, something deeper than they had ever anticipated. As the helicopter ascended, the nuns looked down at the village that had become their refuge. They saw the villagers gathering together, offering silent prayers and farewells. In that moment, the nuns knew they had been a part of something profound, something they would carry with them for the rest of their lives. They had gone into the jungle with one goal in mind, but what they had discovered was not about proving one belief over another. It was about embracing faith in its many forms. As the helicopter flew farther away, the nuns sat together in reflective silence. Each of them, in her own way, had accepted the lessons the jungle had taught them. They had come seeking answers, and they had found them, not in the form of evidence to prove their beliefs, but in the understanding that faith was not about division, but about unity and compassion. The nuns had been changed by their journey in ways they never expected. The jungle had not only tested their survival, but had also tested their hearts and minds. They had discovered that faith in its truest form transcended religious boundaries and connected all people in their shared humanity. As they left the jungle behind, the nuns knew that they would never be the same. The faith they had once clung to so rigidly had given way to something broader, something more profound. They had come to the Amazon with a mission, but they left with a deeper understanding of what it meant to live in faith and humility, with love and respect for all.